If you're glued together right and honorable, you will succeed. Get in there and get rid of stupidities and avoid bad people. Try teaching that to your grandchildren. The best way is by example. Fix yourself. My mother fought cancer for almost a decade and died at 56. She held out long enough to meet the first of her grandchildren and to hold them in her arms. But my other children will never have the chance to know her and experience how loving and gracious she was. It is past time for women to take their rightful place, side by side with men, in the rooms where the fates of peoples, where their children's and grandchildren's fates, are decided. I got a lot of money, but when you wealthy, that mean that your children is ballin', your grandchildren is ballin'. Only one of my grandchildren is serious about a musical instrument, the others dabble in it. I am happier when I love than when I am loved. I adore my husband, my son, my grandchildren, my mother, my dog, and frankly, I don't know if they even like me. But who cares? Loving them is my joy. If I don't make heritage visible and the strength of mother tongue important for my grandchildren, it scares me that they might say in 20 years from now, well, it is rumored that we used to be Africans long ago. And in many urban areas, it's already happening. A mother becomes a true grandmother the day she stops noticing the terrible things her children do because she is so enchanted with the wonderful things her grandchildren do. We are a nation of immigrants. We are the children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren of the ones who wanted a better life, the driven ones, the ones who woke up at night hearing that voice telling them that life in that place called America could be better. I fix my grandchildren's computers. I don't want my grandchildren to go through what I went through. We can no longer continue with a status quo energy policy. We must create sustainable clean energy jobs and leave the planet to our children and grandchildren in better shape than we found it. You see your children growing. You look at your grandchildren, and you say to yourself, what if I weren't here? Have I done all I can to prepare them for their role in life? You realize that you never quite do everything, but you want to do better than what you have done. When I think about the world I would like to leave to my daughter and the grandchildren I hope to have, it is a world that moves away from unequal, unstable, unsustainable interdependence to integrated communities, locally, nationally and globally, that share the characteristics of all successful communities. I'm a man with many defects. I love, I sing, I dream. I was born in the poor countryside. I was raised in the countryside, planting corn and selling sweets made by my grandmother. My children, my 2 daughters are with me and I want a better world for my grandchildren, for your grandchildren. When you run a company, you want to hand it off in better shape than you found it. In the same way, just as we shouldn't leave our children or grandchildren with mountains of national debt and unsustainable entitlement programs, we shouldn't leave them with the economic and environmental costs of climate change. Laughing a lot is really good for you, embracing your children's future and embracing your grandchildren, and not having regrets and not being bitter and not being angry. I believe everyone should have a good death. You know, with your grandchildren around you, a bit of sobbing, because after all, tears are appropriate on a deathbed, and you say goodbye to your loved ones, making certain that one of them has been left behind to look after the shop. My goals have changed throughout my life. At one time it was winning awards, selling out concert dates, selling more albums than anyone else. Now, my goals are to see my grandchildren grown, live a long and healthy life with my family and friends and travel the world. I'm most proud of the longevity of my marriage, my kids, and my grandchildren. If you don't have that, you really don't have very much. A life of stasis would be population control, combined with energy rationing. That is the stasis world that you live in if you stay. And even with improvements in efficiency, you'll still have to ration energy. That, to me, doesn't sound like a very exciting civilization for our grandchildren's grandchildren to live in. My wife, my daughters, even my grandchildren are funny. You've got to keep a sense of humor because anger destroys you. Cyberspace is colonizing what we used to think of as the real world. I think that our grandchildren will probably regard the distinction we make between what we call the real world and what they think of as simply the world as the quaintest and most incomprehensible thing about us. The ideal death, I think, is what was the ideal Victorian death, you know, with your grandchildren around you, a bit of sobbing, and you say goodbye to your loved ones, making certain that one of them has been left behind to look after the shop. I was nice to the people in the Philippines for the 2.5 years I was there, because I knew eventually I'd have to kiss up to them so my grandchildren could have toys. I want my grandchildren to be proud of me. That's the main thing. As the great-grandchildren of the Industrial Revolution, we have learned, at last, that the heedless pursuit of more is unsustainable and, ultimately, unfulfilling. Our planet, our security, our sense of equanimity in our very souls demand something better, something different. God has no grandchildren. He has only children, so being a born-again Christian is not an automatic thing. For all of our history, it has been an article of faith that we in America bestow unto our children and grandchildren a nation that is stronger than the one we were given. Let not the 12 million Negroes be ashamed of the fact that they are the grandchildren of slaves. There is dishonor in being slave owners. Never have children, only grandchildren. If we care about the children, the grandchildren, the future generations, we need to make sure that they do not become the cannon fodder of the future. Grandchildren have taught me how important the future is. I try to look through their eyes and envision what's in their imagination. What's the world going to look like when they're my age? That really does take a huge imagination. My grandchildren are fabulous and funny. After I retire, for some time at least, I will spend my time with my grandchildren and my family members, because all these years, 50 years, I have not been able to give my time to them. I couldn't be more proud of my little sister and the mother she is, and am also incredibly proud of my mom and the huge influence she's had on myself, my sisters, and now her grandchildren. If my grandchildren were to look at me and say, "You were aware species were disappearing and you did nothing, you said nothing," that I think is culpable. I don't know how much more they expect me to be doing. I'd better ask them. Grandchildren are the dots that connect the lines from generation to generation. Why do grandparents and grandchildren get along so well? The mother. The truth is the Republican leadership has created a credit card Congress that is recklessly selling out the future of America, our children and our grandchildren, and President Bush is the most fiscally irresponsible president in the history of America. Elephants and grandchildren never forget. A lot happens at 50, the best thing being that you just don't care anymore. At 40, you still care. At 30, you care way too much. And your 20s are quite frankly a nightmare. Bring on 60, I say, just imagine the joy of having grandchildren. The reason grandparents and grandchildren get along so well is that they have a common enemy. I've always enjoyed seeing the world through the eyes of my grandchildren. You can give your social security check to any organization, public or private, or to individuals. You can donate it to your favorite political party. You can give the funds to a student scholarship for your grandchildren, for example, or to somebody who has a medical need. Or you can invest your government check in free enterprise. The question is, are we happy to suppose that our grandchildren may never be able to see an elephant except in a picture book? What has made America amazing has been the fact that throughout our history, throughout the more than 200 years of our history, there have been men and women of courage who stood up and decided it was more important to look out for the future of their children and their grandchildren than their own political futures. 6 of my 12 grandchildren are black. Gwen and I have 4 children and 10 grandchildren. What we are effectively doing, I say this to the young people of America whom my colleagues represent, is leaving our children and grandchildren the tab for fighting a war, letting them pay for the lion's share of it by simply adding it to the national debt. Visit our website for more quotes, quoting.com.